Hello, everybody. Good to see you. If you'll take out your message notes. Last week we started a new series I've been wanting to do for a while called Counterculture Living in the Age of Outrage. And I got this idea from a book by Ed Stetzer. Remember, we looked at it last week. Here's the cover, Christians in the Age of Outrage, How to Bring Out Our Best When the World is at its Worst. And Ed kicked us off last week, and I've asked him actually to come back in this series and help. But this week, I want us to look at the theme of counterculture kindness. Counterculture kindness. God has a really lot to say in the Bible about counterculture kindness. And the more uncivil, incivil, rude, unkind our world becomes, the more kind and kindness we need to have in our own lives. Now, in a rude and bad-mannered and uncivilized and polarized world, the Bible says we are called to be kind. Let me just show you a few verses. I could really take you from cover to cover in the Bible about kindness, but let me just throw you 3 or 4 to start us off. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15 says this. Make sure you never pay back one wrong for another wrong. Instead, always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. Now, friends, that's counterculture. Would you agree? Instead of paying back, instead of dog eat dog, you return kindness for badness. That is definitely counterculture in this culture. I don't know if you've realized that you and I spend more time trying to look nice than be nice. Yeah, you just think about this. You spend a whole lot more time in front of a mirror trying to make sure that your appearance is right than you spend in front of God trying to make sure your attitude is right. You spend a whole lot more time on your appearance than you do on your attitude on a daily basis. And if you really want to improve your appearance, I know the secret. I'm going to give you Pastor Rick's secret to sexiness. Okay. I know you've been waiting for this. Pastor Rick's secret to sexiness. And I tell you, it's totally free. You don't have to pay anybody for it. All right? Here it is. To look really nice. You want to write this down. To look really nice, be nice. To look nice, be nice. Because your character is going to shine through all of that makeup, or all of that hairdo, or all of that cool clothes you're wearing as a guy or as a gal. Everybody's worried about dressing for success. We want to look right. We want our appearance to be right. We're not so worried about our attitude being right. But if you really want to dress for success, look at this next verse. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves. We're now talking about real dress for success. What kind of clothes do you want to wear if you really want to dress for success? Clothe yourselves with 5 things: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's dressing for success. And if you want to look nice, be nice. Spend more time in front of God with your attitude than you do in front of the mirror on your appearance. God says, I want you to be kind. Now, if people were to ask me, or I were to ask people, what is your best known quality? If I ask the people who know you, what's your best known quality? What would they say about you? What would they say is your best known quality? In Philippians 4, verse 5, God says this, your kindness should be known to all. Now, the reason I want to cover this weekend is because from the bottom of my heart, I want me, and I want you, and I want everybody in our Saddleback family to be famous for kindness. I want people to say, you know those people who are part of Saddleback Church? They're the kindest people in the neighborhood. not some other thing. I want us to be known for kindness. I want people to say about you, that guy is the kindest man I know. That woman is the kindest woman I know. Nobody's kinder than them. Your kindness should be known to all. I want them, when I say, who's the kindest person in your neighborhood? They say your name. Because God wants that to be true. God is very, very clear what he wants you to be famous for. God is very, very clear what he wants you to be known for. Up here on the screen, 1 Corinthians 16, verse 14. Everything you do must be done with what? With love, okay? With love. Well, what is kindness? Write this down. Kindness is simply love in action. Kindness is love in action. Kindness is not an emotion. Kindness is not something you feel. Kindness is something you do. Kindness is love in action. Now, one of Jesus' most famous stories, maybe the most famous story that Jesus ever told, is about counterculture kindness, being kind in an unkind world. And it's called the story of the Good Samaritan. You've heard this probably many times in your life. If you've never heard it, you've seen that word around because it's on thousands of hospitals. Good Samaritan Hospital. Hospitals all around the world have been named after this story. But the background of this story, where Jesus tells a story about kindness, the Good Samaritan, is this. The Jews and the Samaritans were two different races that lived in the same area, and they hated each other. They were both guilty of the sin of racial prejudice. They were both guilty of the sin of bigotry, of racism. And the Jews hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans hated the Jews. In fact, there was a famous Jewish saying in this day that said, it's better to be a dog than to be a Samaritan. That's how vile the racism was between these two races. And they lived right next door to each other. And they were both guilty of the same sin. And Jesus, typically in his counterculture ways and in his turning the tables on everybody, does the exact opposite. And he makes, in a story to a bunch of Jews, he makes the people they hate the most the hero of the story. He makes them the hero of the story. It starts in Luke chapter 10. It's up here on the screen. The story starts like this. One day, an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him a question. Teacher, what must I do to receive eternal life? Not a bad question. And Jesus replied, well, what does the law of Moses say? And the man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. Oh, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's right. You got bingo, you got it right, says Jesus. That's right, good answer. Do this and you'll live. But the man wanted to justify his actions. So he asked Jesus, so, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? If I have to love my neighbor as myself, who's my neighbor? That certainly doesn't mean everybody in the whole world. Let's narrow this down a little bit. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered by telling a story. And this is the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, what's going on here? This guy wants to reduce his responsibility. He doesn't want to have to love everybody. He doesn't want to have to love the whole world. He doesn't want to have to love people who are different from him. So when he says, yeah, I know, love your neighbors yourself, doesn't that just mean like the guy next door or people who are like me or people I get along with or people who are my religion? Surely you don't mean there. Who is my neighbor? What is he doing? He's looking for a loophole in one of God's commands. Now, you've never done that. Looked for a loophole. I don't particularly like this command that God gives, so where is the loophole that I can, slide through to justify my own actions? And he said, I just don't want to have to love everybody, especially enemies, especially people who are different from me. Jesus answered by telling this story, the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, the story is that this guy is going from Jericho down to Jerusalem on the road. I have been on this road before. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem is like coming down a mountain. It's like coming down from Big Bear to San Bernardino. It's a very curvy road, lots of pin tail, curves, and thieves and robbers were famous for being in this area. And when travelers would go from Jericho down to Jerusalem, they would often get robbed, raped, beat up, tortured, all kinds of stuff, because there are plenty of places to hide in these little crooked roads. And this one guy, he gets beat up by a bunch of bandits, and he's left for dead on the side of the road. And then 3 more travelers come down, and they see the guy who's been hurt by the side of the road. The first 2 pay no attention to the guy or just kind of blow him off. And the third guy actually helps him, and he is called the Good Samaritan. He was a Samaritan, so he's the bad guy actually in this culture. He is the guy that a Samaritan helping a Jew would be like a black guy helping save the life of a Ku Klux Klan bigot, or a Holocaust survivor saving the life of a Nazi perpetrator. It's the exact opposite of what you would expect. And so he tells this story, and he says there's 3 different guys. There's a priest, there's a Levite, and there's a Samaritan, and they all encounter this crime scene when they're going from Jericho down to Jerusalem. Each of these 3 people represents an attitude. Now, I want to be clear. You're not one of these. Oh, I'm the Samaritan. No. You can have all 3 of these attitudes in the same day. Okay, you could act like the first guy in one moment, the second guy in another moment, and the third guy in another moment. So don't go, well, that's me, I'm number 3. I'm the good guy. No, you can have all 3 of these attitudes in the exact same day. So we're going to look at it. Each of these represents 3 possible attitudes toward people that you could express, as I said, in 3 different situations. So let's look at the 3 attitudes. The first guy is the priest. He's the first traveler. And here's what we learn from the priest. This attitude is the I can keep my distance attitude. It is the attitude of avoidance. I can keep my distance. And he sees the guy, and he really doesn't want to be close to him, so he goes over to the other side of the road. In Luke chapter 10, verse 30 and 31, it says this. There was a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when robbers attacked him, stripped him, beat him up, leaving him half dead. So he's naked and he's half dead. All of his belongings have been stolen. Now it so happened, I want you to, right now, we'll come back to this. Circle the phrase, it so happened. We'll come back to it later on. It so happened that a priest was going down that same road. But when he saw the man who was in pain, he walked on by on the other side. He walked on by on the other side. Now, this is the attitude of avoidance. If I don't pay attention, then it's not my responsibility. This guy's walking down the road. He sees a man left half for dead, naked, bleeding to death, and instead of helping the guy, he just crosses over to the other side of the road and keeps walking. Out of sight, out of mind. I'm just going to avoid it. I'm going to keep my distance. That's why I move to the other side of the road, to keep my distance. That if I ignore it, I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to pay attention. I'm not responsible. Now, a lot of people actually live this way, and it's this. Don't get too close to people so then you don't have to help them when they're in pain. Don't get too close to people. Keep all your relationships shallow. Don't really get involved in people's lives, your neighbors' lives, friends' lives, small group lives. Just keep all your relationships superficial so you don't have to get involved. And then, because if you get close, you may have to help them. Stick to your own business. That way you can avoid a whole lot of hurt. Keep your distance. Stay distracted. Now, in cities like we live, it's pretty easy to do this, to keep your distance from people. You can live next to people for a long, long time and not be involved in their lives. I happen to have great neighbors on either side of me. The Newberys live on one side and the Mars live on another. They've been great friends for literally decades. They're members of Saddleback Church. But sometimes I can go weeks without even seeing them because we have a thing called automatic garage door openers. An automatic garage door means you can open the door and just go in, close the door, and go right into your house and never, ever see your neighbors. And it might be you only see them when you happen to be out getting the mail at the same time or taking the trash out at the same time, and that may be it. So we actually live in a culture that makes it easy to do this keep my distance avoidance style. You see, we don't realize how many people around us are hurting because we don't see them. You know that in California, this state alone, there are 6 million people who live below the poverty line. 6 million. That's bigger than most states. The number of poor people in this state is bigger than most states in America. And yet you never see them. Why? Because you live on the other side of the road. And you walk on the other side of the road. And so it's easy to live this way, this avoidance lifestyle. Now that's the first attitude I have. I'm just going to keep my distance. When I see somebody in pain, I'll just walk over to the other side of the road and keep walking because I'm busy with what I'm doing. I'm preoccupied with me. Now here's the second attitude. Second attitude represents the second guy. And he's a traveler, and it is this: I can be curious but uncaring. I can be curious, but uncaring. This guy's a little bit more interested, but he's not interested enough to do anything. This is the attitude not of avoidance. This is the attitude of apathy. I see the need of other people. I'm just too self-centered to help. In other words, the second guy, it says he goes down, and he actually goes over and looks at the guy. And goes, wow, very interesting. And then he goes on with his way. So here's what the Bible says about this guy in verse 32. In the same way, a Levite, now a Levite is not a jeans salesman. A Levite is a religious assistant in the temple. So both of these first two guys who do the wrong response, a priest and a Levite, they're both religious people. Being religious does not make you kind. Being like Jesus makes you kind. I've met a lot of religious people who are very unkind. Being religious does not make you kind. You can go to church every week of your life and still be unkind to your wife or your kids or your husband or your friends or the neighbors or people you don't like. Being religious doesn't make you kind. Being like Christ makes you kind. In the same way, a Levite also came there. He went over and looked at the man, but then he walked on by on the other side. So he crosses over, looks at the guy in pain, a naked guy bleeding to death, walks back over and keeps on going. He's saying, I see the need, I'm just too self-centered to help. I'm aware and I stare, but I don't care. That's this guy. I'm aware and I stare, but I don't care. Now, even worse, he sees this beaten up victim. He stares at him, but he doesn't help him. He said, well, I'd never do that. I'd never stare at somebody in pain and not stop to help. You ever seen a freeway accident? All the traffic stops, including you, because everybody's craning their neck to stare, and nobody stops. You have done this. You have done this. Because there are accidents on the freeway, and you didn't stop to help. You stared, you craned, you slowed down. You wanted to see what was going on, but you didn't stop. You didn't stop at all. Everybody stares, nobody stops. That's a lack of kindness. You see, curiosity stares, kindness stops. I've told you many times, a lot of people like to study the steps of Jesus in Galilee, and the steps of Jesus at the Jordan River. And they like to follow the steps, and I've told you before, I like to study the stops of Jesus. What made Jesus stop? What did he allow to interrupt his life? Because almost every single miracle in the Gospels was an interruption. It was because Jesus stopped. He didn't just see, he didn't just stare, he stopped. And that is part of kindness. Be willing to stop and help. Now, curiosity, as I said, stares, kindness stops. We like to read about people's pain. That's why there are all these gossip magazines about everybody else's divorce. Why should you care about that? Why should you care about anybody else's pain that you can't do anything about? That's why they're called gossip magazines, because you're neither part of the problem nor part of the solution. You're just curious. You're this second guy, curious but uncaring. We want to read about other people's pain in People magazine or anything else. We want to talk about other people's pain. We want to discuss people's pain. We just don't want to help their pain. We're fascinated. We're the second guy. We're curious but uncaring. I don't know if you've noticed that it's easier to gossip about people's problems than it is to help them. But it's something it's easy for all of us to do. Let me show you a verse out of the book of Exodus, up here on the screen. Exodus 23, verse 5. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you, okay, so this is not your friend. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you has fallen under a heavy load, do not walk by. Instead, stop, there's the word, stop and offer to help. Now, question. If God cares that much about being kind to animals, do you think he cares about being kind to people? Yeah. If he cares that much, he says, if a donkey has fallen under a heavy load, you stop and help the donkey. You're to be kind and careful and caring about animals, well then certainly you're to be kind and caring about God's people that he has created. Now there's a third attitude, okay? I can keep my distance, avoidance. I can be curious but uncaring, apathetic. Or I can, like the third traveler, the Samaritan, show kindness. I can show kindness, and this is the third response. Verse 33, but a Samaritan who was traveling that way, he's the third guy, came upon the man who'd been beaten and stripped. And when he saw him, his heart was filled with pity. As I said, Jesus loved to turn the tables on people. He does the exact opposite of who you think is going to be the hero here. It's not a religious person. Jesus was never politically correct. He didn't care about being politically correct. He just cared about being correct. And he makes a despised person, a person that people are prejudiced against, who are they are biased against. He makes that guy the hero of the story. And he says, this guy's heart was filled with pity. He's the guy who actually is going to do something. Now notice the next verse on your outline, Matthew 7, verse 12. Always treat others as you would like them to treat you. This is, of course, known as the golden rule. Always treat others as you would like them to treat you. Would that change the world if everybody practiced it? Oh, yeah. Would the world be a kinder, gentler place if everybody practiced that? Yeah. If you treated everybody else the way you would like to be treated. How do you want to be treated? You want to be treated with kindness. And so God says, I want you to treat everybody with kindness because that's the way you want to be treated. Always treat others the way you want to be treated. Why should I be kind? Well, let me give you two reasons. I could give you many, but let me just give you two. Number one, the Bible says that an unkind life is an unproductive life. It's barren. You will not be productive in your life if you are mean. An unkind life is an unproductive life. Look at this verse, Galatians 6:7. I love the Message paraphrase here. The person who plants selfishness, ignoring the needs of others, harvests the crop of weeds, and all he'll have to show for his life is weeds. So I'm not going to be productive unless I learn how to be kind in life. But there's another reason, and it's this. God blesses you when you're kind to other people. Look at this next verse, Proverbs 11:17. Your own soul is nourished when you're kind. Your own soul is nourished when you're kind. So I want to be productive, and I want my soul to be nourished. I want God's blessing on my life. Then what does God want me to do? He wants me to learn to be like him, because the Bible says God is kind. God is gracious. Love in action. That's what kindness is. You know, this week, I looked all over the internet for some examples of people in our culture who were showing kindness. I found almost none. But I did find one. Ellen DeGeneres, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, probably. But you know what? I love her. And I love her because, first, her hilarious humor is always clean. It's always clean, and she never puts down other people. She never hurts other people with her comedy. So I like that. Second, she's a great humanitarian. But really, most of all, she's just a kind soul in a world that's more unkind and more incivil and uncivil than ever before. And I found this little clip. I want you to watch this.
So this weekend, I went to Dallas for the Cowboys game, and during the game, they showed a shot of George and me laughing together, and people were upset. They thought, why is a gay Hollywood liberal sitting next to a conservative Republican president? Didn't even notice I'm holding the brand new iPhone 11, and I was aware that I was going to be surrounded with people from very different views and beliefs, and I'm not talking about politics. I was rooting for the Packers, and get this, everybody in the Cowboys suite was rooting for the Cowboys. And so I had to hide my cheese hat in Portia's purse. Here's the thing. I'm friends with George Bush. In fact, I'm friends with a lot of people who don't share the same beliefs that I have. We're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay that we're all different. Just because I don't agree with someone on everything doesn't mean that I'm not going to be friends with them. When I say be kind to one another, I don't mean only the people that think the same way that you do. I mean be kind to everyone. Doesn't matter.
You know, it's sad I had to use a clip of somebody who doesn't claim to be a Christian to give you an example of kindness. But she's kind. And God wants his children to be kind. He wants you to be kind. He wants me to be kind. And I'll quote her. When I talk about kindness, I'm not just saying be kind to the people who vote like you do. You have to be kind to everybody or stop calling yourself a Christian. The Bible says, "At him that nameth the name of the Lord, depart from iniquity." That means you don't sin. You don't willfully do what Jesus says don't do. And Jesus says, be kind, not unkind. I am not allowed to be unkind to anybody. I don't have to agree with everybody. I don't have to approve of everything, just like God doesn't approve of everything I do or approve of everything you do. If God cuts me some slack, I guess I should cut some other people some slack. And if God has been kind to me, then I better be kind to other people. Whether I happen to agree with them or not, or they're my religion or my belief or my lifestyle or whatever, I am not allowed to be unkind to anybody and call myself a follower of Jesus Christ. So now Jesus tells the story. And in this story of the Good Samaritan, he gives us 4 incredibly powerful, transforming truths on how to be kind. So let's look at them. How can I become a kinder person? Well, Jesus' story teaches us these 4 truths. Number 1, if I want to become a kinder man, you'll be more handsome. If I want to be a kinder woman, you'll be more attractive. You want to look nice, be nice. All right? If I want to be a kinder person, I got to do these 4 things. Number 1, I must see the needs of people around me. Starts with seeing. I must see the needs of people around me. This is the first thing that the Good Samaritan did. In Luke chapter 10, verse 33, it says this: when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. Friends, love begins with looking. Sensitivity begins with seeing. You can't care until first You're aware. You got to see it. Kindness begins in the eyes. It means being more aware of people around you in need than you've ever been before. Kindness begins in the eyes. It's through observation. You can't meet a need if you can't see a need. So it all starts with seeing. I must see the needs of people around me. When he saw the man's condition, then his heart's without him. Now the fact is, wounded people are all around you every moment of your life. They're around you right now. They're sitting on your row. They're at school, they're at work, they're in the neighborhood, they're at the gas station. Wounded people, like that guy who'd been beat up and thrown over to the side of the road, are all around you. But we don't see their wounds. Why? Well, two reasons. One, they're hiding. They're hiding their pain, they're hiding their hurt, they're hiding their grief, they're hiding their loss. And two, you're in a hurry. They're hiding, you're in a hurry. They're hiding, you're in a hurry. Those two things keep you from seeing the needs of people around you. A lot of wounds aren't physical wounds. They're internal, they're emotional, they're traumatic. They're deep, deep. They may have happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, but there's still fallout in the lives of people from deep, deep trauma years and years ago. And you don't see that. So they're hiding, they're hurt, and you have to draw it out. You have to be willing to look for it. But then you're in a hurry. You know, what I've noticed is that when I have to go catch a flight, when I schedule enough time that I'm going to get there in plenty of time and we're not in a hurry, it's all relaxed, I can be nice to everybody. I'm nice to the baggage claim. I'm nice to the sweeper. I'm nice to the barista. I stop, take pictures with people. I'm nice to everybody. But when I'm late and I'm running for a flight I'm about to miss, I don't have time for anybody's hurt because I'm in a hurry. If I'm in a hurry, I can't be kind. Hurry is the death of kindness. Hurry is the death of kindness. If I can't be bothered, it's because I'm busy. Busyness and the ability to be bothered go together. So let me give you a little principle. I want you to write this down. Write this on your outline. The slower I go, the more I'll see. The slower I go, the more I will see. You know, if I wanted to take my family, kids and grandkids, on a cross-country tour of America, I can go fast by a plane, but we're not going to see the country. If you're going at 350 miles an hour at 35,000 feet, you're not seeing much of America. You get there fast, but you're not seeing much. The faster you go, the less you see. If I want them to really see America, I'm going to take a train, which will be slower. Or if I want them to see more, I'm going to drive a car. And I guess if I really wanted to see more, we'd ride bicycles. And if we really wanted to notice all the flora and the fauna, the ants and the crickets and everything, we could walk. The faster I go, the less I see. The slower I go, the more I'll see. And if you want to see the needs of people around you, you have to slow down. You have to slow down. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 10:24, look out for the good of others. It starts with seeing. So your first step in becoming a kind person, a kinder man, a kinder woman, is say, God, give me spiritual radar so I can tune in to the hurts of other people, so I can be kind. Because I can't help a need, I can't meet a need if I can't see the need. I ask God to give me spiritual radar, and I pray, God, help me to see people the way you see them. And you always be on the lookout for those who need help or who need kindness. Now, some of you don't need this message because you're naturally sensitive to the needs of other people. You don't get any credit for that. Those of us who learn it get the credit. I, by nature, am not a naturally sensitive person. I'm a man. I realize that's a generic generalizations, and generalizations can be generally wrong. But the truth is, I know about me in my maleness, I'm not by nature a sensitive person. I'm just not. I've had to learn it. And I've had to learn it the hard way by messing up and not being sensitive and then realizing the pain that that caused. I've had to learn. You can learn anything if you're willing to learn it. Most of us have spiritual ADD when it comes to being sensitive to the needs of others. We have attention deficit disorder. All we can see is ourselves. But you can learn it, and you can get better at it, and you can get better every year. And that's the good news. So look out for the needs of others, but pray and say, God, I need the extra effort because I do have spiritual ADD. I'm just not naturally a sensitive person. I remember one time, this was years ago, I was out on the patio after a service, and a lady came up to me and she said, you know, Pastor Rick, last week you walked right by me and I was crying and you didn't even stop. It broke my heart. It really did. I was broken by that. But the truth is, I didn't see her. I didn't see her. I was going somewhere to do something, and I was, task-oriented. I didn't even see her. And this is the first step. I have to see their needs. I have to see the needs of people around me. Here's the second step to becoming a more kind person. I must sympathize with their pain. I not only see their need, but now I sympathize with their pain. And now we're moving into the emotions. Seeing the need is just being aware. If you care, you'll be aware. But kindness is not just being sensitive, it's also being sympathetic. It's not enough to just see other people's needs, go, yep, they got a need. That's a real need right there. You have to feel their emotions. And Luke 10:33 says this, when he, this is the Good Samaritan, saw the man in pain, his heart was filled with compassion. I want a heart like that. I want a heart like Jesus Christ. I want a heart that has compassion for people in pain. And I don't just blow it off. And I'm just hard. That I'm not just so self-centered and so selfish and so self-preoccupied that all I care about is the kingdom of me, as Kay calls it in her book. The kingdom of me. If you're the king of the kingdom of me, you've got a pretty small king or queen. Now, the Bible says, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. What's that mean? It means being sympathetic. Sometimes you're high, sometimes you're low. You try to mimic, you try to mirror, and you have mirror neurons in your brain that can help you do this, what the emotions of that other people are. You got to feel what they're feeling. When he saw him, his heart was filled with compassion. You share their sorrows. Now, as I said, a lot of us just aren't by nature naturally sympathetic. So how do I become more sympathetic? 2 words. Listen better. Listen better. You become aware with your eyes, but you care with your ears. You become sensitive to the needs around you with your eyes, but you become sympathetic to the needs around you with your ears. With your ears. It is all in listening. I see with my eyes, but I sympathize with my ears. You know this instinctively. I don't have to teach you this. You know that sometimes love means just listening. That people don't need advice. They just need an ear. They just need somebody to listen to them. Sometimes love is just listening. Now again, guys, I don't want to pick on you today, but we have a harder time with this. So I want to suggest to the men that you start practicing what I call first date listening. Okay, if you can remember back that far to your first date, when you had that first date and you really wanted to impress that woman, you're not twiddling your thumbs while she's talking. You're leaning in. You go, yeah, yeah. And you're listening and you're active and you're paying attention and you're nodding and you're emoting. And when you went home from that first date, you were worn out. You're just worn out because you're not used to that kind of listening, okay? 10 years later, you're in Chili's eating your nachos and your wife's talking wah, 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 wah. You're not paying any attention at all, okay? What happened? Okay, practice first date listening, all right? Like it's the first date. And get involved. Really, really think about it. Why am I making a big deal about your ear? Because everybody, including you, everybody has two fundamental, deep needs. Number one, everybody here, you have a need to be understood. You want to be understood. You want to feel like somebody understands you. And number two, everybody has the need to feel validated. You need somebody to go, you're not weird. It's okay to feel that way. Everybody needs to feel understood, and everybody needs to feel validated. And both of those come from listening. You're aware with your eyes. You're sensitive with your eyes, but you're sympathetic with your ears. Get it? Get it? Good. All right. I found this poem many, many years ago, but I've always loved it. It's called Just Listen. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you trample on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel like you have to do something to solve my problems, you failed me, strange as that seems. Just listen. Advice is cheap. 50 cents will get you both Dear Abby and Billy Graham in the same paper, and I can do that for myself. I am not helpless. I may be discouraged, I may be faltering, but I'm not helpless. So please, just listen and hear me out. And then if you want to talk, well, wait a minute for your turn, and I'll listen to you. That is the ministry of listening with your ears. I must sympathize with their pain. How? Through the ear gate. Many years ago, long before Matthew died, I read a book called A View from the Hearse. It was a book on grief by Joe Bailey, and I've never forgotten it. And he says, sometimes when you give a person advice who's grieving, sometimes that's the enemy of kindness, to give advice when someone is grieving. And he says this: I was sitting, torn by grief, and somebody came and talked to me of God's dealings and why it happened and of hope beyond the grave. He talked constantly, and he said things I knew were true, but I was unmoved, except to wish that he'd go away. He finally did. But another came and sat beside me. He didn't talk. He didn't ask me leading questions. He just sat beside me for an hour and more and listened when I said something, answered briefly, prayed simply, and left. I was moved. I was comforted, and I hated to see him go. That's kindness. Now, one of the problems that we have with being sympathetic with people is because we're always judging people by how far they still have to go instead of looking at how far they've come. You're not going to be kind to people if you're always looking at how far they have to go. You don't know what they've already come through. You don't know the trauma in their life. You don't know where they are today is probably a big jump from where they were. And instead of judging them on where they need to be, how about if you judge them on how far they've come already? As Paul says in the Gospels, thank God I'm not what I used to be. Thank God I am what I am. Thank God I'm not what I'm going to be. And that's true of you too. That's true of you too. So I want to give you a very profound key to kindness. I want you to start using it this week. Would you write this down? Here's the key to kindness. Stop, when you see somebody who's irritating you, who's they just rub you the wrong way, they're irritating, you can't stand to be around them or whatever, they just get your dander up. Stop asking what's wrong with them. Okay, write this down. When you find somebody who has a major problem in their life, then it may irritate you, or maybe a social skill is lacking. Stop asking what's wrong with them, and instead, write this down, start asking what happened to them. What happened to them? That's going to make you a lot more sympathetic. If you understood the trauma that they're going through or have gone through and all they've been through, you're going to be a lot more kind. Stop asking, what's wrong with them? Start asking, I wonder what happened to them that caused so much pain. How many hundreds of times have you heard me say, hurt people hurt people? When somebody's hurting you, it's because they have been hurt and they are hurting. Happy people don't hurt people. Hurting people hurt people. And if somebody's hurting you, whether it's your mother or anybody else, it's because they're hurting. And stop asking what's wrong with that person and start asking, what happened to him? You'll be a lot more sympathetic, a lot more sympathetic. Galatians 6:2. Share each other's troubles and problems, and in this way obey the law of Christ. What is the law of Christ? Love your neighbor as yourself. I got this letter just this week from somebody in our church. Dear Pastor Rick, I was having a lot of issues with someone I worked with, and I simply ran out of patience with this guy. And I found myself always thinking poorly of him, and I was snarky with him. I was not polite with him, even when he tried to fix the situation and do his best. Then one day, God convicted me about my unkindness. So I asked God what I should do. And I felt impressed that God wanted me to start doing kind things for this guy who I really didn't like at all. So, in trying to be kind, I started offering him rides when he needed them. I started buying him coffee. I started helping him at work in different ways. What happened was amazing. By acting in kind ways, God changed my heart toward this guy. He stopped being an irritation. Now, at first, I was super uncomfortable. It was super uncomfortable for me to be nice to him. But looking back, I can now see how toxic my heart had become. Today, I'm thankful that God had called me out on my bad attitude, because that guy who I didn't like ended up becoming a really close friend to me for the past decade. It's always easier to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. So I don't feel very kind to that person. Just start being kind. You don't have to, if you wait for feelings, you're never going to be kind. You have to be kind when you don't feel like being kind. You be kind, and you know what? The feelings will follow. It's the way love is. Say, I've lost my love for my spouse. Start acting in a loving way. The feelings will return. You act your way into a feeling. You don't feel your way into an action. You'll never get there if you keep waiting for the feelings to come. You do the right thing even though you don't feel it. He said, it was super difficult for me to be kind to a guy that I was irritated by. This is the transforming power of kindness. So, I got to see a need. I got to be sensitive to need. Quickly, the last two. The third key, is I must seize the moment to help. I must seize the moment to help. This is the principle not of sensitivity or being sympathetic. It's the principle of spontaneity. I must seize the moment to help. I don't wait. I don't delay. I don't procrastinate. I do what I can now. I see a person in need. Kindness, as I said earlier, is not something you feel. Kindness is something you do. Kindness is not an emotion. Kindness is love in action. If you don't act, it doesn't matter how you feel. It's not kindness. If you feel kindly towards somebody but don't do anything, it's not kindness. It's only kindness when you act. Luke 10:34. He went to him. That implies action. He went to him and he bandaged his wounds, pouring out oil and wine on his wounds. Now, I want you to notice in that sense, he's taking the initiative. He doesn't wait for some neighbor to come help him. He just does it all on his own. He helps the guy. He takes the initiative. He uses what he has. Now, it's interesting. It says he used wine and oil. That sounds more like salad dressing than than oil and wine. Well, why? Because he's got a lunch. He doesn't have a first aid kit. He's got lunch. And of course, oil is soothing and wine has alcohol. It's cleansing. It's an antiseptic. So that's the best you can do with what you got. He just takes his lunch and probably takes the lettuce and wraps it around and, little tofu there and, and just the oil and wine together are cleansing and disinfecting and soothing. And then it says he put on bandages. I guarantee you, he didn't have a first aid kit. So what's he using for bandages? His own clothes. He probably takes his shirt off, ties it up in a tourniquet, splits it up, whatever. He's using, where did he get the bandages? He's using his own clothes. There's no doctor there to give him, Band-Aids. He doesn't wait for a professional. Now, this story teaches us two very important things that kindness requires. You might write this down. Two things kindness requires. First, I must be willing to be interrupted. If I'm going to be a kind man, if I'm going to be a kind woman, I must be willing to be interrupted. Because love is often inconvenient. Love takes time. When you are kind, sometimes your schedule goes into the trash. Now think of all the excuses this guy could have done. Well, yeah, I got my own problems to think about. I got important business to attend to in Jerusalem. I'm going to be late for a meeting. Guy's probably dead already. He's beyond help. You could come up with 1,000 excuses. But because he's kind and he says, I see the need and I sympathize with the pain, and now I'm going to seize the moment to help. I have to be willing to be interrupted. Galatians 6:10 says this. Whenever we have the opportunity to help anyone, we should do it. But we should give special attention to those who are in the family of believers. I want you to circle the word whenever. I looked that one up. Whenever means, yeah, you got it. It means whenever. It means all the time. There's no time. Whenever you see a need, help them out. Now, do you remember I told you to circle that phrase earlier, that it said, it so happened that a priest came by? Do you remember we circled that earlier? It so happened that a priest came by. What often seems like a chance encounter is actually a divine destiny encounter. What often seems like a chance happenstance with somebody in need is something that God planned before you were born. It's a God-engineered encounter. And God intentionally places people in your path in pain to teach you kindness. It's an opportunity to grow in love. It's an opportunity, it's how we learn to love. It's how we learn to be kind. So I have to be willing to be interrupted. The second thing that it costs is I must be willing to move against my fears. If I'm going to be kind, I have to be willing to move against my fears, because the kind thing is sometimes a scary thing to do. Imagine the possible fears of this guy. He goes, look, the guy's Jewish, and I'm a Samaritan. He hates my guts. We are racially opposite of each other. What if he wakes up and he sees I'm a Samaritan? He doesn't want my help. Or what if the robbers are still in the area? Now they're going to come and attack me while I'm trying to help this guy. Or what if it's a trap and he's faking it and he's going to get up and attack me and take my donkey and all my stuff? What if he rejects my help? What if other people come by while I'm trying to help him and they think I'm hurting him and they think that I hurt the guy, and then I get blamed and I get hauled into court and it wasn't my fault? What if I really can't help him? What if he asks me to do something I don't know how to do? I mean, there are a million different fears that could keep you from being kind. But you got to move against your fears. Proverbs 3:27-28. Never walk away from someone who deserves your help. Your hand is God's hand for that person. Never tell your neighbor to wait until tomorrow if you can help them now. What does that mean? Seize the moment. Don't delay. Do the kindness now. When somebody loses a loved one, help them now. When somebody gets fired, help them now. When somebody has a miscarriage, help them now. When somebody goes into depression, help them now. It doesn't matter. Don't wait. Seize the moment. That's kindness. Now, I'll just be honest with you. One of the big reasons we often don't get involved in other people's pain is because it reminds us of our own. And it scares us. And it brings up some feelings in us that maybe we haven't dealt with. And it reminds us of our own brokenness. And so, if I can ignore your brokenness, then I don't have to face mine. And if I can ignore your pain, then I don't have to deal with my fears. Get some help, please. Get some help, because it's keeping you from being kind. Your own fears, your own pain is keeping you from being kind. So be kind. I got to see the need, sympathize with the pain, seize the moment. Number 4, I must spend whatever it takes. I must spend whatever it takes. And this is the principle of sacrifice. There is always a cost to kindness. It may cost your time. It may cost your energy. It may cost you money. It might cost you your reputation. It might cost you some friends, because you're crossing the line and helping somebody on the other side. Somebody that all your friends can't stand. They voted differently. They looked differently. They talked differently. They lived differently. They believed differently. And you're helping them. And you have to be willing to have guilt by association. I've got to spend whatever it takes. There's always a cost of kindness. There's always a price tag. And it does require sacrifice of some kind. Verse 34 and 35. Then he, that's the Good Samaritan, put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, where he took care of him. He doesn't know this guy from Adam. The next day, he gave the innkeeper some silver and told him to take care of the man. He doesn't know this guy. And he said, if his bill runs higher than that, I'll pay the difference the next time I'm here. He's spending whatever it takes. Now notice, he takes him to a motel. Now, the guy is nearly dead. So who's riding on the donkey? Not the Good Samaritan. He's put the man on the donkey, and he's walking now. He's walking with fewer clothes than he had before, because he's used them to bandage the guy. And he's nursed him through the night and provided for his care. Then he paid for his bill at great expense. He didn't just call 911 from a cell. He saw it through to completion. He did all that he could to help. What was he going to get out of all this? Nothing. just being kind. Just being kind. Jesus summarizes the story this way in verse 36. Which of these three people would you say was a true neighbor to the one attacked? Remember the guy had said, okay, we're supposed to love my neighbor. Who's my neighbor? Jesus has now told the story. He says, which one of these guys do you think was a neighbor to the one attacked? The man said, well, the one who showed him kindness. Jesus replied, you're right. Now, you go and do the same. And that's what I want to say to you this weekend. You go and do the same. This week, you go out to your community, whether you're in Southern California or those in our church who are in Buenos Aires or Berlin or Manila or Hong Kong, or those watching online, you go out to your community and you go and do the same. Who do you need to be kind to this week? I want you to spend a second here. Try to think of one unbeliever you know that you see on a weekly basis. Think of one unbeliever that you know on a weekly basis. If you know where they're hurting, write down their name and write down the hurt. If you don't know where they're hurting, you've got some work to do. Because everybody has a wound. Everybody is hurting somewhere. And if you care, you'll be aware. Psalm 19, verse 17 says this, being kind to the people in need is like lending to the Lord, and he will repay you for the kindness you have shown. You cannot outgive God. And God says, if you're kind to the people who I put in your path, I'm going to be kind to you more than you can imagine. Being kind to people in need is like lending to the Lord. You want a loan from the Lord? Are you loaned to the Lord? He said, he will repay you for the kindness you have shown. Friends, this is what it means to be counterculture. This is what it means to be counterculture in an unkind and unloving world. That when people put you down, you build them up. When people criticize you, you praise them. When people are unkind, you're kind to them. When people are in need, doesn't matter who they are, you help them. And if your enemy's donkey is in a ditch, you go help pull it out. Because that's what it means to follow Christ. Why should I be kind like that? Because of God's great kindness to me. Last verse, Ephesians 2:8. God saved you through faith as an act of his kindness. You had nothing to do with it. Being saved is a gift from God. Everything I have in life and everything you have is a gift of God's kindness. Now you go and be kind.